Day one of Baltimore Ravens mandatory minicamp for 2023 officially in the books, and we dive into a couple of wide receiver updates, looking at Odell Beckham Jr.'s first Ravens practice, also an injury update on Rashod Bateman. All that and more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen each and every day. Free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. So subscribe for free, no money involved, both audio and video form. If you're an everyday listener, an everydayer, as we call them over here on our network, thank you so much for tuning in every day and showing that support. And if this is your first time listening to the show, or if you're just coming back for a little more, and this is maybe your second time, maybe you've been here 100 times. We're on episode 1008 right now for Locked On Ravens. Thank you for showing your support as well. 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, of course. So any Ravens news, analysis, updates, we have it here for you on the show. And today we have a lot to dive into in terms of mandatory minicamp. We're going to talk about what went on during the first day of mandatory minicamp. Of course, it is Odell Beckham Jr.'s first Ravens practice. We'll talk about how he looked, what he had to say to the media as well. Then in the second part of the show, we'll look at Rashod Bateman, look at an injury update with him and his expected timeline to get back onto the field. Then finally, we'll take a look at Adrian Amos and the Ravens' interest. They had more interest, but did he sign with the Ravens? We'll talk about that. Spoiler alert, the answer is no. We'll talk about why. And then we'll look at just other minicamp takeaways, roster moves the Ravens made, and more. So let's get into the content now. Odell Beckham Jr., obviously one of the Ravens' biggest additions, definitely player-wise, on the roster for them this year. Going to make a huge impact for them overall. And this was the first time he suited up and actually got out on the field for the Ravens. Wasn't there during the earlier portion of the offseason. Obviously, at the introductory press conference, so he's been inside the building, but wasn't there for football school, wasn't there for voluntary OTAs, but mandatory minicamp just a little bit. John Harbaugh said the whole team reported. So that's really good news for them. No holdouts. It's also good news. We talked about Kevin Zeitler a bit yesterday and J.K. Dobbins. There was some wonder about him. Odell Beckham Jr. didn't report to either of football school or voluntary team activities, but he was there yesterday, and it was good to have him there. The Ravens released a lot of content about Odell Beckham Jr. And look, rightfully so. He's a huge, not only great football player, but a huge personality. Someone who we all know Lamar Jackson's like, everybody talks about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's the talk of town. Odell Beckham Jr. has that aura, has that personality, and is essentially a celebrity in every sense of the word. So the Ravens put out, videos of him walking onto the field. And they posted a little bit of a highlight video too, made a sliding catch in there. Looked good overall. He's kind of ramping up. John Harbaugh said there is a ramp up process for Odell Beckham, but from what, everybody could see, definitely looked good based off of, obviously, look, we haven't seen him playing over a year, right? This is a guy that I think a lot of people are looking forward to seeing get back on the field, got injured, tore the ACL in the Super Bowl of 2021. This is a situation for the Ravens where they're going to be able to hopefully, we don't know yet, but hopefully get a player back who is motivated. Well, that part I know. Odell Beckham Jr. is motivated, but the health factor is going to be big there. So it's not like he's going to be out there all the time, every single practice, every single snap, and every single play. But there's going to be a ramp-up process for him. Now, when speaking to the media, Odell Beckham did have a lot of interesting things to say. I think the quote that captured everyone was about DeAndre Hopkins, who, look, we've talked about plenty on the show, and we're going to talk about it again right now because, obviously, Lamar Jackson requested both DeAndre Hopkins and Odell Beckham Jr., at least saying, hey, what can we do here? Can this maybe be an option? The Ravens sign Odell Beckham. Now, he was asked, Odell Beckham was about his communication with DeAndre Hopkins and talked a little bit about the 30-year mark too. And, said, no, if you can play, you can play. But with DeAndre Hopkins, they were both in Arizona. They were joking before the draft about possibly even going to the Ravens. And that is not really his call, obviously. And said he's excited to watch him again. He thinks he can still ball. So, there was talk, whether it was jokes or not, about going to the Ravens, and everybody's, DeAndre to Baltimore. I still don't think it's going to happen, but who knows? Maybe it will. But there were a lot of interesting tidbits that Odell Beckham had to say. Obviously, mentioned Lamar Jackson as one of the driving factors behind signing with the Ravens, and that was pretty widely known, I feel like. But for what Baltimore has at the wide receiver group right now, you can argue, I think there are people on both sides of the scale. Some people believe that Odell's a number one. Other people believe Rashod Bateman is a number one. We will see as time goes on here. But talking about his first impressions of being in Baltimore and saying he's happy to be back in the building and, been away from the game a little bit. So being able to get back and get things going. And also talking about chemistry, developing chemistry over time, also said that he'll be down in Florida training with Lamar Jackson. So there is plenty of time for that. And he's not really worried about it. Definitely seemed nonchalant about the whole thing. And look, he's bought into Baltimore. He talked about him being at the Preakness, was wearing an Oriole City Connect hat. So he has embraced the city. And that to me is one thing that's really, really cool. Not just him being, a member of the Ravens in Baltimore, but him actually becoming an active member of the community in Baltimore, which is really, really cool to see. Odell also talked a little bit about his expectations for practice over the next couple of days and participation amounts for him. Said he doesn't really have a set play or play numbers in his head, but you get the reps in, you get your work, and you don't always have to build the chemistry by taking those reps. Also said he's not necessarily sure, is he at 100% health? He said he doesn't really know. He's been asked the question. He's never given a percent number, and he likes where he's at right now. That's what he's saying. He's trying to gear up, get ready, and have that ramp up period happen. Says he's safe to say he feels good about the progress. Odell said yes, he feels good, and also talked a lot about his familiarity, and also talked a lot about his familiarity with Todd Monken. Obviously, they were together for a year in Cleveland, and talked, football, as he said, it's different verbiage, different language, and foreign language just readjusted into different words. And the most important thing for him, he said it throughout the course of the entire interview, making sure he's healthy and the rest will take care of itself. Also talked about how putting on a jersey, was emotional, meaningful for him, but he's in a good mental headspace right now. He's trying to downplay it, but he's going to be excited to put on a jersey for the first time. And building up patience during the post-injury process, said it was a process, and feels like, when that is, when being at the top of, sports success, of success in general, when that's taken away from you, it's not really easy to live with. And I think that's for anything. And talked a little bit about how, you can write all the stories in the world, but you have to do it on the field during the season. So this is, I talked about, he is motivated, looked to be motivated, and I feel like will contribute for them, assuming obviously health permitting. But then also talked a bit about his Super Bowl experience, saying that, it was not fun for him to get injured during there, said that, he was ready to go, was locked in before the game, and then, talked about what he did during the game, scored a touchdown, and he said he's been on record saying he thought he was on his way to winning the Super Bowl MVP. So I think Odell is someone that Ravens fans are going to really love, and talked about playing with Lamar Jackson. I said he's one of the reasons why Odell signed in Baltimore. He's been watching Lamar for years, watching him who's at Louisville, and say he doesn't know who's faster. So maybe we'll have to get a race between those two guys. But, with New York, with him being there and being with Saquon Barkley, seeing another guy putting on those cleats and knowing they're special, and said that's the same thing with Lamar Jackson. He's excited about the opportunity to play with him, and talked about him as a passer a little bit too. The perception versus reality. Lamar plays quarterback. He said he's been throwing the ball all his life, and said he's got a strong arm. It gets to you fast, and he's excited about that. And he said, he'll take 10 passes over 10 runs all the time. If they're going to air it out, that's fine with him. And that's, to me, a big takeaway from Odell's first practice for me with that particular answer is the fact that I don't know if Odell signs here. In fact, I highly doubt Odell signs here if Greg Roman's the offensive coordinator, or the offense is still super, super run-oriented. Again, not saying they're going to abandon it, not saying they're going to take it out of the playbook, but I do think that this is an opportunity for them to really air the ball out with the group of wide receivers that they have. And as we've heard Lamar Jackson say, now we hear Odell Beckham say it. Running is these guys like the football. They like to catch passes, and it's going to be exciting to see what they can do overall. And also did talk about embracing the city of Baltimore. Jameel McClain, a former Ravens player, and I was the director of player engagement with them. He heard a lot of great things. Jameel McClain played in New York with Odell, so that's how we kind of heard about it. Said, you'll love it. You'll love the city. And so he's not an Orioles fan. He said, don't get me in trouble now. but he's excited and wants to check out the city, check out the atmosphere, and being present and staying in the moment. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into an injury update on Rashod Bateman. So going from Odell Beckham Jr. to Rashod Bateman. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And make your way to FanDuel because right now new customers can get no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And we're now done with the NBA Finals. And we now full baseball season with the Orioles. So if you want to bet on Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, who's been on a tear recently, or just Orioles wins, go and do it over at FanDuel. They have great promotions every day. They have a safe and secure app. You can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on all the action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, diving into wide receiver talk. We just talked about Odell Beckham Jr.'s first practice with the Ravens. Again, looked good based off everything we could see with the videos. Had a lot of very insightful answers. But let's get into Rashod Bateman now. Someone who, again, you talk about Odell, you talk about Rashod Bateman. Those two, and obviously Zay Flowers and some of the other guys, are going to be very important to Baltimore's success this year. But Bateman not on the field for the Ravens, and there was an update on him and what he's working with. John Harbaugh saying Rashod Bateman working off to the side, doing individual work, and doesn't expect him to be fully involved during mandatory minicamp. And John Harbaugh said he had a shot for healing purposes, a cortisone type deal that will keep him out for a couple days, and said that the team decided to just let him keep rehabbing and making sure he's ready to go for training camp. And I think the initial reaction to this was a lot of worry for a lot of people, because with Rashod Bateman, you obviously don't want to hear about something like this. But I think this is the Ravens just being cautious and making sure they're taking every precautionary measure they can with their guys to make sure, look, it doesn't necessarily matter if they're ready right now. What matters is they're ready for week one and they're fully healthy for week one. If Rashod Bateman has to miss time to get back to 100% and misses reps because of it, look, 100% okay. You don't want to force these guys to be out there and do all this crazy stuff. And, they're not fully healthy, not fully confident. And then they land one way and you have a step back and they're out for a couple more months. You don't want to have that. Now, with the cortisone type deal, I think people hear that and they're like, oh, like, what's going on? Is this any type of big deal? And Jeff Mueller, who, does some medical work, sports injury stuff, talked about it a little bit, saying that John Harbaugh saying that Bateman got the injection for healing purposes is not a normal procedure to simply just give cortisone injections out to a protocol timeline. And so something must be bothering him as he ramps up in his training. And so saying it's something that people should monitor right now. There's no need to panic on him right now. And the hope is that this isn't necessarily to address an irritation that would require a second surgery, such as removing hardware, which obviously would delay ramp up for the season. And I think that this, again, all of this stuff coming out right now is giving a lot of fans worry. I would not read too much into it. Obviously, it's not ideal for this to happen at this point. But look, if this is the best course of action that the Ravens want to take right now, and if it is for healing purposes, as the Ravens saying, again, we don't like John Harbaugh. I don't think he's going to fully disclose everything here. I think we learned that a little bit last year. But for right now, unless Bateman isn't on the field, if Bateman misses all of minicamp and then comes back and participates in training camp, then that's awesome, right? That's fine. I would not get worried about this right now until training camp starts. Then I think my panic meter will start to go up a little bit, or if we hear something else before then. But Bateman is doing work on the side, John Harbaugh did say. And so for right now, we're going to see what the whole thing is. And foot injuries are not easy. Like, they're not easy to come back from. I think a lot of people are saying, oh, now you got to sign D-Hop because of Rashod Bateman. I get where that's coming from, because if Bateman has to miss time, if Beckham misses time, you got to continue to work up your depth. And if more depth gets injured, then, having DeAndre Hopkins is a really good insurance policy. But I'm not going to personally panic on this until training camp comes. And if he's not on the field for training camp or the start of training camp, then I'll start to wonder, is this something that's going to linger or will continue to linger for Rashod Bateman? That's the updates we have now at the time of this recording. So maybe something else has come out after this was recorded, but for now, that's what we have. And Odell Beckham actually talked a little bit about, having wisdom to share with Rashod Bateman about overcoming the injury. And obviously because Beckham went through his own experiences going through that stuff. and saying that, it's never easy. Each injury is different, and it's about the team just helping each other out with the mentality of it. And when you come back from being injured, there's always a little bit of fear that you have to get over, and you don't want to have it happen again, is what he said pretty much. So he's talked about how Rashod Bateman was training with him and said that they talked about it a lot and said that he's headed in the right direction and they're gearing up and getting ready for the season. So for Bateman, I'm sure there will be a little bit of hesitancy coming back fully from this thing, planting on the foot, cutting with the foot. And that's just, it's natural. There will be that hesitancy. Some guys have that for a longer period of time than others. Other guys just get it out of the way and go, all right, let's go, let's do it. You can't really predict what each player does in terms of that regard, but maybe Bateman starts the season a bit slower than some people think because he's just trying to find his body again, feel out his foot. And again, foot injuries, they linger. They are never easy to get over, especially one where Bateman had to have the surgery. And, we've seen with even Marquise Brown, a recent example as well, who had the Lisfranc injury, had to come back from that, had the screws in his foot and everything. So right now at this point, Bateman is a very important player to what the Ravens want to do. And if he has to miss time, it's a big blow to them, especially if it lingers into the regular season. What that ends up meaning for them is it puts a very big emphasis. They already are under, I believe personally, a little bit of pressure here to start fast because three of their first 5 games are against AFC North opponents on the road. They'll be done with AFC North road games after week 5. If Bateman has to go on PUP, let's say, and miss the first 6 games of the year, that would not be ideal. I think, Zay Flowers is, an NFL ready receiver. I'm not, discounting Zay Flowers. I think the Ravens they've done a much better job this offseason. I give Eric DeCosta a lot of credit for this, of building the depth in case this happens. And I think they honestly had to, because at the end of the day, I don't know. I feel like with what the Ravens did last year, the approach was not right. I think they believed in what they believed in, and the principle wasn't wrong. But the approach, I don't believe, was fully maximizing what they could have done. And we talked about how worst case scenario, Bateman goes down and the room is already on thin ice. And then if Duvernay goes down, it's just broken. And what happened? Both of them went down. If Bateman goes down, he has to miss some time. You still have Odell, you have Zay Flowers, you have Devin Duvernay, you have Nelson Aguilar, a couple other guys as well. Hey, DeAndre Hopkins will be great in that room. Don't get me wrong about that. But at the end of the day, it gives me a little hesitancy with Rashod Bateman right now. It's like, you want him to be out there, you want him to be practicing with the team, doing stuff with them fully. But if this is the path that they have to take with Bateman right now, and he has to miss minicamp in order to get fully healthy, I think that Baltimore has to, just live with that. But, medical experts and, everybody is who I have seen at least. And again, this is when this is recorded. Maybe other opinions have come out, but people are saying it's not nothing, but it's not something to panic over just yet. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk a bit about Adrian Amos a little bit, what the latest with him is, and also talk about more minicamp takeaways, looking at what John Harbaugh had to say, performances from training camp, standouts, and a lot more. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to on the show. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Midweek edition here on Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen each and every day on this channel and on the show in general, audio form, video form. I appreciate wherever, however you're listening. Again, be sure to subscribe and follow along for 5-day-a-week Ravens content. We do have a little bit of breaking news right now, at least at the time I'm recording this show. By the time you hear it, it'll probably not be so breaking anymore. But I literally, was scrolling and seeing if I missed anything. And breaking news here. We talked about Adrian Amos and what his future could be in the NFL. We now know that as he signed with the New York Jets. And there was reported interest from the Ravens. He actually visited Baltimore reportedly a second time yesterday or this week, but ended up going to the Jets. The Jets offered a more lucrative contract. But the breaking news is that the reason it seems like the Jets were more aggressive on Adrian Amos than maybe the Ravens were was that former Ravens safety Chuck Clark is believed to have suffered a serious knee injury. So this is, super unfortunate for Chuck Clark. Obviously got traded from Baltimore to the Jets this offseason, has been very durable over the course of his career. And it's a definite gut punch, for obviously the Jets. And it's just, you feel bad for Chuck Clark in general now. I hope that it's nothing serious, but the belief at the time of this recording, and there's been nothing confirmed yet, is that he has suffered a serious knee injury. And so it makes a lot more sense now why the Jets seemingly were so aggressive in bringing in Adrian Amos, someone who Baltimore was linked to, and again, had the reported interest and had him visit for a second time this week, and just missed out on him. And the Jets, I think, paid for a guy that will fit into their defense. I think now with Chuck Clark, there's a more defined role if that knee injury is serious for Chuck Clark. But Baltimore, I think what this says about the Ravens is they're still definitely looking for secondary help, whether that is at safety or at corner. Now, Baltimore's pretty set at safety overall. I mean, they have Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton and Geno Stone there as well. But corner-wise, I really think Bryce Callahan to me is the move. I've thought it over. Cole Jackson, who's a friend of the show, does really great work. Put it out, like, who are the options available? Cole believes that, corner is the biggest need for them. I have corner ranked number 2, just slightly. Literally, it's almost neck and neck, but slightly below edge. But corner-wise, maybe it's Marcus Peters. There are a couple other outside options. I believe they need to figure out who their slot guy is going to be, though. And speaking of that, we have some updates from mandatory minicamp, and Jeff Rebeck gave his lowdown of what happened, saying that Nelson Agholor and Isaiah Likely were probably the most active pass catchers for the Ravens. Agholor caught a TD pass from Lamar Jackson. Odell Beckham only played a few plays in full team as part of his ramp-up. He had 1 reception. Otherwise, defense got their hands on a lot of footballs. Darius Washington had an interception and several pass breakups. He had a really nice day. Daryl Worley had an interception. Rocky Yassin stepped in front of Beckham and nearly intercepted a Jackson pass. And Jonas Schaefer does Lamar Jackson completion counts. It's something cool that he does. So Jonas Schaefer said that unofficially Lamar Jackson was 26 for 35 in team drills with a few drops and dropped interception in that as well. He said Nelson Agholor, Devin Duvernay, Isaiah Likely flashed on offense. David Ajabo, Odafe Owe, Rocky Yassin, and Darius Washington on defense. Now, to me, I've talked about the slot position a lot, and I just think who really is going to play there? I really don't. There's not a surefire option because Kyle Hamilton, I believe, is going to take on a role for the Ravens in the back end of that secondary, play more safety. John Harbaugh pretty much said as much. I think Darius Washington is a very realistic player to take on that role. Washington, undrafted guy out of TCU a couple years ago, plays with a chip on his shoulder, hasn't had an opportunity to necessarily make a huge impact at the NFL level. Came in as a safety, but teams view him as a slot guy. He was, undersized per se for the safety position, but I don't knock guys for size as much as some people do. It's not really my thing. But to me, you look at who are the other options. Pepe Williams, I think Darius Washington is in that mix. I mean, I guess you can throw Kyle Hamilton in there if you want to, but I mean, who else? I might be forgetting 1 or 2 people, but I really think it's going to come down to Pepe Williams versus Darius Washington. And I think Washington is a really good player. He jumps out to you on film, especially, his college film when I watched him then a couple years ago. Someone who has ball instincts, is always around the football, very deceptive, hard hitter as well, sticky in coverage, and a guy that I think can step in and make an impact for them. So I don't know. To me, I think that Darius Washington could be the guy at the slot position overall. But other than that, the Ravens' first day of mandatory minicamp went pretty well overall. I think that for what Baltimore has, they have a lot of depth and they can kind of sort through what they're looking for over the next week. And then obviously training camp, when that starts up, that'll be the big time. That'll be big time for them. But we'll look at a little bit of what John Harbaugh had to say to the media yesterday, talking a lot. And when asked about Odell Beckham, said that he's going to be a full go in terms of health, but talked about the ramp up. They're not going to be in a hurry to throw guys out there with too many reps. They want to get a feel for everything, learning the offense like a lot of guys have been. So seeing as they go with Odell, and talked about, how with Odell, you love great players, you love great people, guys who love football, and said that, he loves football. He's a highly decorated player and has been in big battles. He's excited to go, and he's excited that his guys are there and that all of the guys are there. Had a lot of praise for Michael Pierce, talked a lot about Justin Madubuike as well, expects him to take off, looked at the competitive nature of the wide receiver group too, and said that the group that he has right now maybe rivals the group of Jacoby Jones, Torrey Smith, Steve Smith Sr., and saying that it might be the best the group he has right now. Said that it's up for them to determine that, but, he's very excited about all of those players, and said that he had to talk with his team about gambling a little bit, and gave injury updates as well. Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams. Jalen Armour-Davis is out, and Pepe Williams is doing some ECG stuff, some individual, so he's going to be out, start a training camp. That's where he's at with his process. So a lot of questions about Odell in here, and also talked about his responsibilities for Lamar Jackson changing within the offense and saying that Lamar's been a guy who's always prepared really hard. And it's going to be a different type of preparation now because now they're going to be different things he's responsible for looking at. And again, I think the Ravens, Greg Rowan, whatever, did Lamar a little bit of a disservice by not giving him that freedom earlier. Now he has to learn that stuff. I'm not saying he can't do it. I think he will. But I wish he had that experience a little bit earlier in his career, and the Ravens, for some reason, just did not give that to him. But Todd Monken, the way that he's been teaching things, John Harbaugh is very impressed with. And, he's feeling the game, and now they have to just get to work, let it rip, and see what happens. This is John Harbaugh so eloquently put it. Justin Madubuike also spoke to the media. We'll talk about that to round out the show a little bit. Talking a bit about Calais Campbell and his departure, and if he's taken on more of a leadership role in that room, and saying he would say so. There are, a lot of the young guys asking him questions and, saying that he likes to inform the guys that he was informed of different stuff by the older guys when he was quote unquote young guy. He still is a young guy, but saying he's focusing on details right now a little bit more than anybody else for now. And saying that he's really excited to work with Chuck Smith and that he's been working on some pass rush moves. Chuck Smith is the outside linebackers coach, but Justin Madubuike working on some pass rush moves and saying that, he actually worked with him before that Chuck Smith got to the Ravens in Atlanta. And so they had a prior relationship, which is really good for him. And talked about the extension a little bit, but kind of tossed it aside. Didn't want to get too much into it, saying he's not really focused on that, trying to put his head down and work. And said, the way that Calais Campbell showed him the way, passing that down. So it feels like he has taken on a leadership role, saying that the last year of his rookie deal, wants to have a little urgency, chose to pick the route of putting your head down and work hard, keep working hard. So again, very passive on the whole extension conversation. And also had a funny little tidbit on the Lamar Jackson contract saga when it happened, and said that he personally didn't pay too much attention, but his family was like, "Are you going to sign him? You're going to sign him?" And, he said he didn't know what was going on. He was going to focus on what he could control. But, let the chips fall where they may, he said. He said he's glad Lamar is there. He's a great quarterback. They love him as a teammate and a person. And then was asked about what he wanted to work on and said a sack celebration. So he wanted to get some ideas for that and figure it out along the way, but didn't do anything like necessarily, work wise in terms of like, oh, does he need to work on a pass rush move or, strength or whatnot. He said, yeah, let me get a sack celebration. Let me do that. So really funny stuff there from Justin Madubuike. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Be sure to subscribe in both video form and audio form for 5-day-a-week Ravens content. Tell a friend, tell a family member we're here for you every single week. Then when we get back here tomorrow, more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.